What if I told you that 25 million women are missing in China? Girls who should have been born between 1980 and 2010 but weren't. In some years, 118 boys were born for every 100 girls. To put that in perspective, the natural ratio is about 105 boys for every 100 girls. This gender imbalance is so severe that millions of Chinese men will never find wives. And this is just one consequence of the most draconian population control measure any country has ever implemented. Let me show you how limiting families to one child for nearly 4 decades created a generation unlike any in human history. A generation called little emperors and empresses. A generation that's reshaping everything from consumer behavior to housing markets to China's economic future. Growing up in Beijing in the 1980s, I was in the vanguard of the one-child policy generation. I didn't know of any Han Chinese families like my own with more than one child. Of the 120 peers I came to know closely during my grade school and middle school years, only one Uyghur student had a sibling. Just one, out of 120 classmates. This wasn't unusual. This was the norm for an entire generation. And understanding this generation is key to understanding modern China. Because these little emperors, now in their 30s and 40s, are becoming China's consumers, China's business leaders, China's parents. Or rather, they're choosing not to become parents. And that choice is reshaping China's future in ways that nobody anticipated. Today, I'm going to walk you through the one-child revolution, how it happened, why it happened, and most importantly, what it means for China's economy and the world. The story begins with Chairman Mao. In the early days of the People's Republic of China, Mao encouraged women to have as many children as possible. Women with big families were rewarded with public accolades like heroine mom. For Mao, more people meant more power. His newly founded nation needed a big army and a large labor force. His strategy worked. The result was a steep rise in China's fertility rate, which climbed from a little more than 4 people per family in 1950 to more than 7 by 1964. By the early 1970s, with 80% of China's 800 million people below the poverty line, feeding the nation had become a major challenge. According to an ancient Chinese saying, the emperor regards his people as heaven. People regard food as their heaven. China's leadership was well versed in the history of revolutions, which were often triggered by an underfed population. They had to act. A series of restrictive policies followed. At first, they were more like moral suasion. The government came up with the slogan, late, sparse, and few. Men should marry no earlier than age 25, women no earlier than 23, minimum 3-year spacing between first and second child, fewer children overall. 3 is too many and 2 is just right. Despite being voluntary, these guidelines had some effect. In the 1970s, China's total fertility rate dropped significantly. The average fertility rate for urban households fell from 3 children in the early 1970s to 2 children by the middle of the decade. But for Deng Xiaoping, who stepped into power in 1978, this wasn't enough. Deng was aware that a large population slowed the growth of GDP per capita. He wanted quality over quantity when it came to his people. Deng's instruction to the State Population Council was blunt and forceful. Bring the population down. I don't care how you do it. This led to the imposition of the one-child policy in 1978. Within 4 years, according to the Urban Household Survey, 96% of urban families were having just one child. Exemptions were granted to rural families that needed helping hands on the farm, to ethnic minorities who could have 2 or more children, and to twins whom families were thankfully allowed to keep. Implementation of the law was enforced at the community level. Birth planning enforcers in each residential compound kept detailed records of contraceptive use and even menstrual cycles, detecting out-of-quota pregnancies early. Enforcement led to many horror stories that I won't detail here. But the vast majority of people went along with the policy, aware of the need to manage China's exploding population. For most families, the cost of breaking the rule was simply too high to bear. Large financial penalties, job loss from state-owned companies, loss of social benefits like education, healthcare, and residence permits. The incentives were clear: have one child or face severe consequences. And so began one of the largest social experiments in human history. 400 million births were prevented over the next 3 decades. An entire generation grew up as only children. And the consequences, both intended and unintended, are still unfolding today. Let me start with the most visible consequence, the little emperors and empresses themselves. There's a popular Chinese verse that captures this perfectly. It goes something like this. You, my little emperor and empress, you take a fancy to rain or shine, and they will come at your beck and call. You're fed, and you're attired without lifting a single finger. Oh, how can I hold you? What if you melt? Should I take you in my mouth? And what if you fall? Should I try to hold you tight in my arms? This wasn't just poetry. This was reality for millions of Chinese families. One child became the center of attention for 2 parents and often 4 grandparents. 6 adults focusing all their resources, all their hopes, all their expectations on one child. The psychological effects were profound. These children grew up with enormous pressure to succeed, but they also grew up with unprecedented resources devoted to their development. No competition with siblings for parental attention. No need to share toys, clothing, or educational opportunities. Everything flowed to them. But here's where it gets really interesting from an economic perspective. The one-child policy didn't just create little emperors. It fundamentally changed how Chinese families behaved economically. And to understand this, I need to tell you about the twin test. Here's the challenge for economists studying the one-child policy. How do you isolate its effects? You can't simply compare families before and after the policy because so many other things changed in China during that period. Rapid growth, market reforms, privatization. How do you know what's caused by the policy versus what's caused by everything else? The answer is brilliant in its simplicity. Compare Han Chinese families who had one child with Han Chinese families who happen to have twins. Twins are just good luck, 1% of urban families. There's nothing noticeably different about families with twins except that they have 2 children instead of 1. So by comparing these families during the same time period, you can isolate the effect of having 2 children versus 1. And the results are striking. Between 1990 and 2010, families with twins had much lower saving rates than only child families. The difference was as large as 9 percentage points. If only child families saved an average of 30% of their disposable income, families with twins saved only 21%. Let that sink in. Having 1 child versus 2 increased the household saving rate by nearly 50%. This is one of the largest effects of any policy on household behavior ever documented. Why? There are several reasons. First, the obvious one. Fewer children means lower expenses. Food, clothing, education, these are consumed individually and can't be shared. But there's a deeper reason tied to Chinese culture and the way retirement works in China. Throughout Chinese history, children have been expected to support their parents in old age. This is Shaoshun, filial piety, a basic sign of moral character according to Confucian philosophy. It's not just a virtue, it's part of China's cultural bedrock. Respecting elders, heeding their advice, taking care of them in old age, these are powerful social norms. They're even enshrined in China's legal system. Let me use my own family as an example. My father was born in 1949 before any fertility policy was in place. His mother was a heroin mom who had 5 children. When my grandparents retired, my father bought them an apartment. Regular financial support came from all 5 children. A daughter and son living nearby looked after them and kept them company. They were well cared for by a large group of children working together. My father and his siblings, however, were limited to having only 1 child each. As a result, they needed to rely more on themselves in old age. One-child support, no matter how prosperous that child becomes, cannot replace what 3 or 4 children can provide. This might include living nearby or offering daily care. To offset this gap, my parents' generation felt compelled to save more during their income-earning years. Greater risk and uncertainty also provided additional incentives to save. The earthquake in Wenchuan in 2008 that killed many young students in flimsily built schools highlights the potential tragedies that are even more horrific for only child families. If your only child dies, you have no one to care for you in old age. In China, government pensions and social security have covered only a portion of the population, often modestly and sometimes fail to meet obligations altogether. In urban households, pensions make up less than a quarter of retirement income. So families fill the gap. And families with only 1 child need to save more to compensate for having fewer children to rely on. But saving isn't the only thing that changed. Education investment exploded. And here again, the twin test reveals striking patterns. Figure in the data shows spending on education for an only child versus a twin, according to the age of the child. For younger children, the difference is negligible. These are the mandatory education years when public education is basically free. But as children become older, the only child gets a much larger allocation of family spending than a twin. At one point, nearly twice as much. Chinese households spend a lot on their children's education. And they spend even more when they have only 1 child. Why? Because parents are making a trade-off between quantity and quality. Nobel laureate Gary Becker famously studied this in the 1970s. The fewer children you have, the bigger the education investment per child. By reducing the number of children, the one-child policy raised their quality, just as Deng Xiaoping intended. The results are dramatic. On average, girls receive more years of schooling thanks to the one-child policy. In families with 2 children, a boy and a girl, the daughter would receive 0.4 years less schooling than the boy. In families with 5 children, daughters received on average 2.1 years less schooling. But in one-child families, the disparity disappears. Today's one-child generation is the most educated in Chinese history. High school completion rates increased dramatically. College attendance soared. This super-educated generation is now entering the workforce, becoming consumers, shaping China's economy. But education investment created its own problems. As more families invested more in education, the cost of education skyrocketed. Tutoring became an arms race. Getting into top schools became brutally competitive. China's birth rate fell to a record low in 2021, with no signs of an upward trend. An insidious cycle had been set in motion. The one-child policy led to increased human capital investment, which hiked the cost of education, which weakened the inclination to have more children. Education competition became a common source of national angst. At one point, the country's most popular TV series was a family drama about getting kids into the right schools. In summer 2021, the government mandated a complete shutdown of tutorial classes for school-aged children. The move caused a historic drop in the market value of China's largest education companies. But perhaps the most shocking consequence of the one-child policy was the gender imbalance. 25 million women are missing. In some years, 118 boys were born for every 100 girls. Prior to 1982, the ratio was 108 to 100, close to the natural rate. The root cause lies in a historical preference for sons over daughters. This bias is easy to understand given filial obligations. Historically, sons have been better positioned to take care of parents financially than daughters. When ultrasound technologies were introduced in the 1980s to implement population control policies, they were frequently used for sex selection. This is no longer legal in China, but in the past the practice was widespread, especially in rural China, where families need sons to help with physical labor. Studies show that parents who had a daughter first were more likely to have sons on the second and third try, strongly suggesting sex selection was taking place. And this gender imbalance created another economic effect that nobody anticipated: competitive saving. Given the shortage of marriageable women, bachelors need to demonstrate material wealth to attract a wife. Saving has become a competitive national sport among parents with one child. Because family lineage is so important in Chinese culture, families chip in to help sons save money so they can find wives. Two economists, Shang Jinwei and Xiaobo Zhang, found that families with sons saved more on average than families with daughters, controlling for income and other household characteristics. Those living in places with more skewed gender ratios saved even more. These patterns hold at the macro level too. Provinces that experienced a faster increase in the gender ratio gap experienced a greater surge in saving rates. You might assume that if families with sons save more, then families with daughters could relax and save less. But what economists find is that families with daughters also save in order to raise the bargaining power of their daughters, investing more in their education, hoping to raise the quality of their daughters' prospective matches. And this brings me to what I call the six-wallet phenomenon. Many current homebuyers were born under the one-child policy. When the time comes for that only-child couple to purchase a home, there's not just one wallet available, but as many as six, the couple plus both sets of parents. And if grandparents join in, there could be as many as 10 wallets. This matters enormously for understanding China's housing market. According to a Shanghai daily survey of Chinese mothers with young daughters conducted in 2010, 80% objected to their daughters marrying a non-homeowner. So owning a home became essential for marriage. And with 6 wallets contributing to the down payment, young couples could afford homes that would otherwise be completely out of reach. The home ownership rate in China is the highest in the world, more than 90% for urban households, compared with 65% in the US or 42% in Switzerland. The 6-wallet phenomenon is a big part of why. But here's the twist. Since the one-child policy was rescinded, the next generation of home purchasers may not enjoy as much family support. The 6-wallet phenomenon may become a thing of the past. And this has enormous implications for China's housing market. Now, let me tell you about the most unexpected consequence of the one-child policy. It launched a golden era for Chinese women. The missing women phenomenon reflects an egregious bias against women. But the one-child policy had the unanticipated effect of reversing the fortunes of the girls who were born. The reason is simple: daughters are raised as sons. Like the legendary heroine Mulan, who stepped into her father's place to lead his army because she had no brother. In the one-child generation, there are many such families. Daughters no longer need to compete with brothers for resources, particularly in education. Today, daughters are even better educated than sons on average. Financial returns on education are also higher for women than for men. For the years between 2000 and 2009, economists estimate an 11 to 12% return per year of schooling for women, compared to 6-7% for men. Chinese women today occupy leadership positions in politics, business, and academia at rates that would have been unimaginable a generation ago. The one-child policy, for all its flaws and tragedies, created opportunities for women that transformed Chinese society. But all these changes, intended and unintended, are now creating new challenges. China's population is aging rapidly. About half the Chinese population was under 20 before 1980. By 2015, that share had fallen to 24%. By 2050, more than a third of the population will be above 60. Demographic transitions like this happen naturally when countries become richer. But in China, the transition happened much faster because of the one-child policy. This raises the question, will China grow old before it grows rich? There are real economic risks associated with an aging population. Huge fiscal pressure from overburdened pension programs, a reduction in the labor force, slower growth. Many analysts worry about these trends, but I'm more sanguine about the situation. What matters isn't just headcounts in the labor force, it's the amount of productive labor. And this one-child generation is the most educated, most skilled generation in Chinese history. One highly educated, productive worker can contribute more than several less educated workers. The real concern is that the young generation isn't having more kids, even now that they can. China's birth rate fell to a record low in 2021. Even with the policy rescinded, fertility rates aren't recovering. Why? Because habits and preferences have changed, perhaps permanently. Education costs and property prices are major impediments. But there's something deeper. This generation grew up as little emperors and empresses. They're used to being the center of attention. They're used to having resources devoted to them. Having children means sacrificing that, and many are choosing not to. This has enormous implications for consumer behavior. The one-child generation is more individualistic than their parents. They spend more on themselves. They travel more. They pursue hobbies and interests. They're less concerned with saving for children because many don't plan to have children. They're also more willing to take risks, to start businesses, to try new things. They grew up with confidence that comes from being the focus of their family's attention and resources. But they also carry enormous pressure. They're the sole hope for their parents' old age. They can't share that burden with siblings. And this pressure shapes everything from career choices to lifestyle decisions. Understanding this generation is essential to understanding modern China. They're the consumers driving China's shift from an export-led economy to a consumption-led economy. They're the entrepreneurs creating China's most innovative companies. They're the leaders shaping China's future, but they're also the reason China faces a demographic crisis. An aging population, low fertility rates, a shrinking workforce. These challenges will define China's economic trajectory for decades to come. The one-child policy achieved its goal. It slowed population growth dramatically. 400 million births were prevented. GDP per capita grew faster than it would have otherwise. China became wealthier. But the policy also created unintended consequences that will shape China for generations. The gender imbalance, the little emperors, the super-educated generation that doesn't want children, the six-wallet phenomenon, the golden age for women. All of these emerged from a single policy decision in 1978, and now China is living with the results. The one-child policy was officially ended in 2015. Families can now have 2 children, and since 2021, 3 children. But the damage, or perhaps the transformation, is done. This generation's preferences and behaviors were shaped by growing up as only children. And those preferences aren't changing just because the policy changed. China's future will be shaped by these 400 million little emperors and empresses, how they consume, how they work, whether they have children, how they care for their aging parents. All of these will determine whether China grows rich before it grows old, whether it can transition from a manufacturing powerhouse to an innovation economy, whether it can maintain social stability as its population ages. The one-child revolution isn't over. It's just entering a new phase. And understanding this revolution is key to understanding where China is heading. In the next episode, we're going to dive into another aspect of this new generation's behavior, their relationship with money. We'll explore the six-wallet phenomenon in more depth, looking at China's housing market and why property prices have soared to levels that make San Francisco look affordable. We'll examine shadow banking, the financial system's dark side that nearly brought China to crisis. And we'll understand why China's financial system is both remarkably resilient and deeply vulnerable. But it all connects back to this generation, the little emperors who are now buying homes with 6 wallets, who are investing in ways their parents never could, who are reshaping China's entire financial landscape. The one-child revolution created a generation unlike any in human history, and that generation is now remaking China, for better and for worse.